So the topic of what I'll be talking about today is the spiritual process, or specifically is yoga scientific. Now we hear this a lot, that what we teach, the school that we belong to, the process we teach, it is scientific. It is scientific. There is a problem with using that word scientific and throwing it around like that. The reason I'm speaking this is because there was a little heated discussion, and I'm the guy who teaches yoga, I'm the guy who has the lineage, but I insist that it's not scientific, and all the others are insisting that it is after all scientific. So then I asked them, what do you mean by scientific? And it just seems to be a sort of pious aspiration that people have. So I realized that people don't really understand what scientific means. It's just a word that we throw around. So let's say something about what is scientific, or what is the scientific process, and why spiritual processes and yoga especially cannot by definition be scientific. Which does not mean they are invalid. You see, that is the problem. People have come to the conclusion that the only valid form of knowledge is the scientific form, which is again a huge misconception, but let's deal with that a little later. The scientist, for him or her, what is important is they observe something and they want to find an explanation for that. Then they propose an explanation which will deal with the events that transpire. Now, in ancient times, when people saw the sun seemingly move across the sky, and they said that is Surya Devta in his chariot and he is riding across the sky, that was a hypothesis, that is a possible explanation for the events. So anytime you try to propose an explanation for something, that is a hypothesis. When they have a hypothesis, scientists try to design experiments. How do we test this hypothesis and see whether it is true? So they test it, and they have certain expectations as to the results. If those results are consistently achieved, they have to check that they are not cheating or they are not deluding themselves. And then those results and the hypotheses and the parameters of the experiment have to be submitted to other people. That is a process called peer review, where other scientists try to replicate your results. Now they have to do the experiment in exactly the same way as you did it, and they have to come to the same results as you get. So unless the results can be replicated, unless the experiment can be duplicated step by step with no deviation whatsoever, it is not a scientific process. And at the end of all that, if enough scientists, enough peer review, they keep testing hypotheses, they keep designing experiments, and they keep getting the identical results, then the hypothesis is promoted to something called a theory. Now in India, theory is the word we use for hypothesis. Oh, that is only theory, it is not practical. Actually, theory means something that has been proved or scientifically proved. Scientifically proved till otherwise. So we come to the next problem, that is called falsibility. A theory is valid until it is proved false. The most famous example is the black swan example. All swans were white. There was no doubt about the matter. Wherever you went in the world, swans were white, until Australia was discovered by the rest of the world. The Aborigines living there knew about Australia, but they found black swans there. So what was the truth till now has suddenly been falsified. So any event, just like the Newtonian view of the world, the Newtonian view of how physics works, how gravity works, was superseded by the Einsteinian view of, subatomic physics took over the. So this notion of repeating in exactly the same laboratory conditions and achieving the same results, which spiritual process or which yogic process can you do that? How can you have exactly the same conditions? How can you have exactly the same results? I've been teaching this 9-week course on pranayama and kundalini, and 8th week, actually 7th week, as soon as the 7th week was over, they were reporting. By the 8th week, out of the 12 people who were coming regularly for the course, about 10 of them experienced various levels of kundalini activation, 3 of them big time, huge. But each one of those experiences were different. Now, because of my years of experience with kundalini, because of my knowledge with the kundalini, I can explain what is happening to them. But it is not the same. And if you talk to a neuroscientist, he will say it is all in the brain anyway. This is all your imagination. So since you teach the people, okay, you can say that the teacher is the same, the environment is the same, the process is the same, the words, the breaths, the methods all are the same. So to that extent it is a valid experiment. But the results are wildly vary. In a small group of homogeneous people living in Mumbai city, all more or less the same age, the results are varying wildly. So it falls totally out. It is out of hand. You cannot say that these things are scientific. And the same with anything. Even if you learn Hatha Yoga asanas, you learn mudras, whatever spiritual process you learn, why do we stick to spiritual process? You teach people music. People have varying levels of success. You teach people to paint. They have varying levels of success. People understand that everybody is not destined to be a painter, everybody is not destined to be a dancer. Certain innate and inherent talent has to be there with all the training. People don't seem to believe that about writing. Everybody seems to believe they can write. That is another matter. But none of these, neither dance, nor music, nor writing, nor poetry, nor yoga, none of these can be classified as scientific processes. Then why this crazy insistence? Why this constant insistence that this is scientific, this is scientific? Because of inferiority complex. We have come to the point where we believe that the only valid form of knowing, the only valid form of knowledge is the scientific method, and all others are somehow inferior. This is catastrophic. This is a complete catastrophic because it means that the scientific methodology is not only privileged, it is now by definition the only form of truthful and authentic knowledge. We are saying truth and authenticity exists only in the scientific methodology. That is an awfully stupid thing to say. For those who want to know about the challenges from within the scientific establishment to the whole scientific worldview, Rupert Sheldrake. Just go on to YouTube and you will find the 10 myths or the 10 problems with science. He's a guy who really talks very, very articulately and clearly about it, where he speaks about all the limitations of the scientific worldview. But the scientific worldview is so successful. You see, we are one civilization whether we like it or not. I was making this point to this cross-cultural group. I had people from South America, from Egypt, from Europe. I had one person who was actually born in Slovakia but grew up in Argentina. I don't know how that happened. Just last week in Goa, I was doing this corporate workshop and I was saying see, we are all coming here in Goa and we are all speaking the common language English. So whether we like it or not, we have become one global civilization. Even the Taliban, who rejects everything in the world, they don't want to fight from horseback with bows and arrows and swords. They want AK-47s, rocket launchers, and if possible an atom bomb. Yes? So the civilizational argument is over. The civilizational argument is over. Whether we like it or not, we are one common civilization, one common global civilization. The only difference is in culture. And the only difference is, will we accept that the scientific paradigm is the only paradigm? It is a very powerful and a very useful and a very transformatory and a very universal and something that by default has been accepted by everybody. But is that the only form of knowledge that we will accept is valid? Is that the only form of knowledge that we will say, yes, that is true, that is authentic, everything else is somehow lacking? I wouldn't accept that. I wouldn't accept it for the sake of music, I wouldn't accept it for the sake of painting, I wouldn't accept it for the sake of literature. These are the things I've spent my life on. I don't have any scientific aptitude, I don't have any mathematical aptitude. I deeply respect those who have. But I will not let them tell me that my knowledge and my experiences are less authentic than their knowledge and their experiences. Yes, I agree, it is not scientific. That does not mean it is not authentic. That does not mean it is not true. So this inferiority complex, especially in India, we have this huge inferiority complex vis-a-vis the West. And until we get a stamp of approval from a Western authority, nothing seems to be enough for us. Nothing seems to be adequate for us. So this trying to say that we are completely up to date, I can understand why, and I don't really blame people for it. But insisting that something is scientific. So when we were having this conversation, one of my students said, but Indians feel more convinced if you say it is scientific. I'm like, that is because you don't know what the word scientific means. And I said, do you remember in school, all of us were made to write one essay, Vigyan ke Chamatkar. Yes, the miracles of science. Yeah, you were not, because you were not educated here, but the rest of us, we had to endure it. Yes, Vigyan ke Chamatkar, everybody remembers the miracles of science. Now, even as a child, I used to wonder, if it is science, how is it a miracle? And I was really shot down very heavily by my teacher, Rohit is being his usual self, asking these questions, and I'm like, Vigyan hai to chamatkar kaise? If it is science, how is it a miracle? But you see, that is the mind, that is the unconscious mind. We are telling children in our educational institutions, we cannot distinguish the two. We cannot distinguish. Of course, Arthur C. Clarke has a very famous statement where he said that any sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic to a less advanced society. It's one of his very, very famous statements where he said that if some advanced alien civilization discovers warp drive and finally comes to Earth, they will look like gods to us. Because their technology is so advanced, it will look like magic. But this whole confusion between Vigyan and Chamatkar, and this whole mishran, or this whole mingling between science and magic, or science and the supernatural, which is all fine. I mean, it's a society in transition. We are a country that has actual Stone Age cultures. The Jarawas in the Andaman Islands, they are a literal Stone Age culture. We have hunter-gatherers, we have subsistence farmers, we have industrial agriculture, we have all the stages of human development are perfectly preserved in India. India is a permanent museum for everything that is obsolete and been overtaken by history. But in India, history stops. We live in a zone outside of history, which is why we don't have a historical sense. We have a mythological sense. But this problem, there is a deeper issue. I understand all these things, and I don't really have an issue with somebody feeling or somebody wanting to say that their yoga is scientific, or that ancient India had great science. If you read the Mahabharata, there is a description. Ashwatthama launches his Brahmastra, and the description is exactly that of a modern day atomic bomb, including down to radiation fallout. That doesn't mean that atomic bombs existed in the time of the Mahabharata. It could just mean that somebody was very intuitive, or somebody had a real good ability to project into the future. If you read the Ramayana, they are coming back from Lanka in the Pushpaka Vimana, Valmiki Ramayana, and Sita asks Rama, it is daylight, but why are we able to see the stars? And he's like, we are at an altitude where the sunlight does not reach. That doesn't mean that they had an actual flying machine. It is not proof. It is not proof that they had an actual flying machine. It could just mean that they had some good understanding of basic physics. The time to come from Lanka to Ayodhya was like 9.5 hours. The Colombo-Allahabad flight, which used to be there in the days of the British, also used to take 9.5 hours. So again, that is not proof that we had a flying machine. Kalidasa has mentioned flying machines, descriptions of how the world looks from above, how the world changes as we are coming in for the landing. All these things are not proof. All these things are not scientific, and we get into all these hysteria about these things, and try to, again because of inferiority, again because of inferiority, again because of inferiority. But there's something much deeper, and there is a deeper problem with this attitude of trying to label spiritual processes, especially yoga or Vedanta, as scientific, or tying it to Vedanta